You are part of a conversation, a tradition that is over 3,500 years running. It surpasses your ethnicity and any other arbitrary characteristic that you might conjure up. So why don't you buckle in and join me as we explore the great conversation of the Western world. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name's Devan. Thank you so much for joining me. It's so good to see you again. If you're new here, welcome to the journey that we're about to embark on. I hope you're ready for a great episode. Truthfully, I think that out of the 11 episodes I've recorded now, I think this is maybe the best one or the second best at least. And so I hope you're ready for a great episode. Now, there's a bit of a twist here. So I accidentally, like the doofus I can sometimes be, recorded the video having the camera facing the wrong way. And now you might be wondering how that's possible. I just use my phone as my video because it's cheap and it's what I have right now, and hopefully in the future I can invest in something a bit more permanent as like a DSLR or whatever. I'm not quite sure on cameras, but hopefully that's something coming in the future. However, I goofed and had the camera facing the wrong way and didn't notice until I hit stop record on my camera, and that was very disheartening and very unfortunate because I thought this was a great episode. So instead of me re-recording like I did in the last episode because I had allergies, I really was quite exhausted from that, I thought that I would just keep it. We're just going to keep going because I thought it was phenomenal. I thought everything fit together really well, and we're just going to go with it. And so instead of having it blank, I've created a little waiting area, I guess, is kind of how I look at it. It has just my logo and a spinny thing and keeps everybody occupied. Keeps me occupied. Honestly, it's kind of entertaining to just kind of watch it, like the loading screen, just kind of like that. I have that for moments that a picture doesn't fit, but I'm also including pictures because I thought that it'd be kind of fun to just include some AI pictures that I generated for this, not a whole lot, but some, and just some also art that I think fits or other pictures of people that I discuss in this conversation. So I thought that I'd include that for you just to give some sort of life there, because you're not going to get to see my beautiful face throughout the whole video. And so I hope that you all are all right with that. You and I'll cope with that together. But I hope that as you watch the episode, that you appreciate the ideas and the depth of the ideas that are coming to light. And this is really, I think, a conversation that Gen Z needs to hear, that my generation, right? I'm Gen Z. And so I think that we need to hear this. We need to participate in it, and we need to really be at the forefront of the development of all of these ideas. Otherwise, things aren't going to end up so well. And so you'll find out what I mean by that in just a minute. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy the video, and thanks for joining me. And so you might be wondering, what is the great conversation? And truthfully, I am wondering too. I'm still uncovering this mystery. And so today, what I have for you is my understanding of the what, the why, and the how you can contribute to this great conversation. And that's because I'm not versed in this very much at all. And this surpasses much of my knowledge. And there's so many nuances that go along with a conversation that lasts over 3,500 years and is the centerpiece of the Western world. And so I can never hope to think that I could talk from a knowing stance. I just honestly happened to run across this by happenstance. My wife was going to work and there was a book share event where people dropped off books they didn't want, and she sent me a text saying, "Hey, do you know this writer? It's Epictetus." And I said, "Yeah, that sounds familiar. I don't think I've read that individual, but send me a picture of the book. I'm interested." And so she sends me a picture of the book, and it looks a lot like this. and it's got this tan, orange-ish kind of color to it. And I said, oh, that's weird. And then she sent me the inside of the book, and it's got this list of 54 authors. And I said, wait a minute. Well, at the end is Freud. I know him because, well, I was a psych student, and now I'm a counselor, a therapist. And so I said, well, I know him, and I know Marx, obviously, and I know Hegel and Boswell and Fielding and Augustine and Thomas Aquinas and Homer and all the sort. And I said, wow, that's phenomenal. Does that book have all of them? And she said, no, but there's a bunch of books like it. And I said, well, send me a picture. And she's just got this big box. And you can see over there my collection that I have thus far. It's not complete. I think she managed to scrounge up 33 of the 54 books of the collection. And I just was like, wow, this is amazing. Honestly, they kind of look good on a shelf. 54 books all in a row. Well, 33, but all in a row. They look the same. They're just ordered really nice. I'm like, that's smooth. That's like, it's like classic. It looks like the, collection of encyclopedias that you saw on your grandparents' bookshelves and in libraries and in teachers' offices and professors' offices. You're like, wow, this is pretty cool. And so I was like, great. I was just kind of glad to have it and to have some good authors. And eventually I started digging around it a little bit. They kind of sat there for a few months. This was, I don't know, about a year and a half ago. And I said, why don't I just check it out a little bit? And so I went ahead and read Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. And that was a phenomenal book. And I was really just blown away. And I will eventually at some point do a review of that book because it's just wonderful. It has so many great lessons that we can all, regardless of your faith or education, can understand. And so I'll just link that down below, I guess. But just so you guys can hopefully enjoy it as well. And so I think getting back to it, I had no clue really what this conversation was. And I had read Dostoevsky and I said, well, what is this what is the first one of the book? And so I have it right here, and it's titled The Great Conversation. And I was just kind of confused. I wasn't quite sure. And so I decided to open it, and I read it. And I started to encounter, I think is the right word, the most motivational writing that I've ever read, other than like some epic poem, something like the Iliad. And I said to myself, wow, this is an amazing thing. And I was so moved, actually, that I just started a thread on Twitter and just pulled out all of these amazing quotes and kind of riffed on some of the ideas because I was just so moved by it. I was like, wow, this is incredible. And I just want to share this with people. I don't know how many people have seen it. I don't really care. I just want to share it. And so that's what I did. And then I said, well, maybe there's more to this. Maybe there's more to this collection. And certainly there is. And so really what we have here is this collection of all of the great books of the Western dialogue. And in just a moment, I'm going to read for you the first opening lines of The Great Conversation, which is written by Mortimer Adler, one of the chief editors of the collection, along with Hutchins, although I forget his first name, unfortunately. And so I thought that was just some of the best writing I'd ever read, and I got really motivated. And so what I'm doing, just cluing you in, is I'm going to go, hopefully I can maintain it. I might bounce around a little bit, but I'm going to go from book to book to book and analyze it both on Twitter and in some videos and try to break down the conversation and also bring you along with, because that's ultimately what I want to do. I'm so motivated by this that I want this great conversation to not just be on pages in a book, but also out in the world, and so that we can have videos like the one I'm making and the ones I'm going to continue to make, and also the ones that I hope you make and discuss and talk with me in the articles that I'm going to write, maybe in Substack or elsewhere, or maybe books that you write or I write or others write. And so I hope that we can all come together and continue this conversation, because it's happening whether we know it or not, whether we're conscious of it or not, because chances are, if you're watching this video, you're part of the Western world, at least in some capacity, hope, more than likely not, you're part of the West entirely. If you're in America or Europe listening to this in some English-speaking country, you're impacted by the West. And so because the West is so important to how the world functions and also the flourishing of the world, right, that we have now, it's important that we understand the ideas that have gotten us here, where we might have went wrong, and what we can do to contribute and start to build upwards again. Because if you check out my last video, I discuss how right now we're just in this muck. And in the last video, I used milieu very awfully, and so I just want to preface that. But if you do go check it out, I incorrectly used the word milieu. But we're in this muck and really in the manure of things right now because we've expanded outward so much that it's time to build up. We have to build up through virtue, right? And we have to find our significance in the West once again. And I believe, truthfully, that it's in this great conversation, in these books lie the ideas that will get us upwards, that will point us upwards. Because if we aren't going upwards, we're either staying stagnant and slowly sinking, or honestly, which the way I feel currently, in the current state of affairs, that we're just really pointing the vehicle down and we're just in a nosedive right now. And so I think it's important that if we're going to adjust the course and to try and go upwards again, that we read and educate ourselves with the ideas in these books because they're central to the conversation we're happening. And so when we discuss the great books of the Western world, which is this collection, there's a few important nuances, I guess, or things to cover. And so what this collection is here is 54 books in the first edition, which was published in 1952. This collection has 104 volumes, and so there's 104 different separate volumes inside those books that cover 102 ideas, and those 102, they call them great ideas. Those 102 ideas range from angels to love to power to governance to all sorts of different things, really big ideas that we talk about all the time. Right? We have these in conversation. What is government? What are we ought to do? Right? And so they cover all of these ideas, and they're beautifully laid out, I will say, and I just have them right here. They're called a syntopicon. And so the syntopicon is 2 volumes, and so there are 2 editions, 2 books, and they are really large. I mean, they're huge. And so each are about 600-700 pages, maybe not that many, but they split up the great ideas, and they give beautiful overlays of these topics, and then all of the references to the books in the great collection and outside of it, which I think is a wonderful addition to it, is that they go beyond just the books that they include, because they want people, the editors want everybody that comes across this to branch out to the wider body of knowledge, because of course you could include so many books. That's why there's only 54 different authors. And so I think that it's important that we take this and say, okay, here's a great reference guide for us to go up. And that's exactly what I think this is, because in the 102 ideas that are covered in the Syntopicon and in the great collection itself are 2,987 different topics. And that's incredible, like different subtopics. And so all of these likely come up in your conversations every day. And are you aware? I mean, just a genuine question. Are you aware of the nuance, of the history, of the depth of the ideas you're discussing? Or are you just passing by? And so this is a great opportunity for anybody who has sort of ears to hear and a heart to learn, that they can take this collection and say, here we go, let's dive into it. And it's also great too if you're doing some research, or if you're trying to understand an idea, if you had a thought pop in, you just had a epiphany and you're go, well, I wonder what this is. I've done this a few different times now. I'm not going to pretend like I did it a bunch, but I've done it a couple times with ideas I've had on, especially the will, because that's something I'm very interested in, is our will. And so I've gone and referenced the different things that, the will are talked about regarding the will in these books and elsewhere. And I found a lot of good information, and I thought to myself, wow, I actually have a genuine idea here, which I hope to bring you all into the conversation as well. And so they have such a wealth and breadth of knowledge and topics covered, because it goes from the histories to fantasy to mathematics and astronomy, and it's just this wonderful conglomerate of different and wonderful ideas that are central to the way the world operates today as we know it. And so we'd be remiss if we ignored a collection like this. And so there are two different collections, because as maybe you've done a Google search now, there are two different collections. And so there's the 1952 edition and there's the 1990 edition. So the 1952 edition has 54 books, and they all really are pre-20th century, and they discuss in the Great Conversation, which I recommend you pick up a copy if you are probably not likely to buy a collection like this, because they're very expensive, although I know buying the books individually are very expensive. But I mean, when you piece it out a little bit more, it's a little bit more palatable to the pocketbook, especially today. And so I think picking up a book like this, The Great Conversation, is going to be really important if you want to understand a bit of the idea, because really what they cover, and I said I was going to read it in a second, so I'll read it here. But really what they cover is just this whole background of why this is so important, and kind of what I spoke about now, but also add to it. And I certainly don't want to take away from any of what Adler or Hutchins has said, but it really outlines the importance, because what we need to do is have a vast education if we're to improve the world. Because when we have specialist educations, like a lot of the educations we have today are, we can run into a lot of trouble because you don't understand. And interestingly enough, I'm just making this connection now, is how even in Plato's Republic, he talks about the importance of the liberal idea, because it expands so far beyond the just the specialization that a role requires, right? And so you might be a construction worker, and so why might I need to know a romantic literature, right? Well, because you also love, because you also have a desire to be loved. And so that might be a way that you can deepen your understanding. And so I could go on and make lots of different connections, but I hope you get the point. And so I'm going to read here for the opening line, because I think it's so concise and so beautiful, of just what the tradition of the West is, what these books offer, and really where you fit into the conversation, all really within one paragraph. So here we go. Chapter 1, the tradition of the West is embodied in the Great Conversation that began in the dawn of history and that continues to the present day. Whatever the merits of other civilizations in other respects, no civilization is like that of the West in this respect. No other civilization can claim that its defining characteristic is a dialogue of this sort. No dialogue in any other civilization can compare with that of the West in the number of great works of the mind that have contributed to this dialogue. The goal towards which Western society moves is the civilization of the dialogue. The spirit of the Western civilization is the spirit of inquiry. Its dominant element is the logos. Nothing is to remain undiscussed. Everybody is to speak his mind. No proposition is to be left unexamined. The exchange of ideas is held to be the path to the realization of the potentialities of the race. By the race, he means the human race. And so I think that's just a beautiful and concise way to express the spirit of creating this collection and the spirit that I am trying to understand when it comes to this, and trying to maybe awaken inside you that we have this dialogue, this continuing run of events that has happened, this conversation from Homer to Plato to Aristotle to Aquinas to Dante to Freud. We have this continuous conversation because they all reference and build off of one another and cross-check each other and build upon the ideas of one another. And now that's not to say that it doesn't happen elsewhere, but never for so long and with so many different authors has this occurred. And so it's really important that we ground ourselves in that history, and to remember that we're part of something much more significant than ourselves. And hopefully that will allow us to find some meaning, some purpose in our lives, and to let us know where we fit, because it seems that a lot of people today are having an identity crisis. And why are we having identity crisis in the West? Well, it's because we don't know what we are and where we come from and what our history is, what our tradition is and ought to be. And that largely is a result of this lackadaisical education and this systematic education that we've received. And it's not liberal. And in the Great Conversation, they point out a lot of the flaws of this education that we have today. And it's so interesting because I think that people were maybe a bit more educated, or at least broadly educated, in this time in the universities. And he goes to discuss that, no, that's not the case, that education's been in decline for a long time, and that this is today just the fruit of what we have. So many people get educated, but to what degree? What degree are we educating people? And so that's a lot of the questions that are asked in that book and kind of answered in there as well. And so I think it's a wonderful book to pick up if you're interested in the conversation of the West, but aren't ready to sit down and read someone like Plato or Kant even. I mean, that's someone who terrifies me a little bit. Although I've read some of his work, it still terrifies me. So, as I think it does everybody, because it's just so particular. And so I think it offers something. And so going back to the different editions, the 1990 edition went from 54 volumes to 60 volumes. They included 4 women authors, and they previously had none in the collection, and so they added 4 women authors, and some texts were deleted, and they removed some texts. I can't remember exactly who. I read it earlier, but you can go on Wikipedia and probably find it. And so some texts were deleted and others were added. And so they added more 20th century authors and focused those latter 6 editions, although they remixed some of them, but they had some additions. Not all 6 were contemporary, but most were. And so that's just a difference in those. And the reason I focus on the 1952 is because I think that it's a little bit more genuinely focused and not trying to update it. Now, I get that they were at the end of the century, and that's something you want to do, is you want to update texts, I suppose. But I really like the spirit that they had in the 1952 edition, that they were going to not include these. They did have editions where they talked about potential additions regarding the 19th century, the 20th century. But I thought that might have been a task for the 21st century, is to determine the 20th century's texts. And so we could go on, right, and try to build this conversation out a little bit more. And I think that's something that we can do, because the 1990 edition seems a little sketchy. It seems a little virtue signaling and trying to play to a crowd, I guess. And so, but I think that all in all, these great ideas covered by the great thinkers is the main point to take out of this, of what this is, and a dialogue that has not ended, right? It has not ended. Camus didn't end it. Derrida didn't end it. There's no ending to this dialogue. It continues. They're part of the dialogue for sure. But I think that it's important to say, okay, what can we do? And so I'll get to that at the end, of really what you can do to add to the conversation. But if you're still here, I'd appreciate if you're following along and this is your first time and you're not subscribed, to hit the subscribe button, and also to share this with a friend, because I think it's very important that we get this conversation out there and to get more people involved in what we're trying to build here. You and I, we can do this together, and it has to be together. I can't do this by myself. And so share it with a friend, share it with your family, whoever you think might also have ears to hear. And so next, I want to get into why read it, because we have the what it is, and I talked a bit about why, but I think it's important that we really discuss just a bit more on why read it, and because that's a great question. You might get to the mathematics section like I might, and you might say, Copernicus, not today, not happening, Kepler, I just can't do it. Well, I think that's a false notion of what we're capable of. Just because we've read Shakespeare doesn't mean that we can't read those harder math texts, or that we appreciate Shakespeare more, or that we're an English major and we have no use for mathematics. You're wrong, because this is a conversation that is integrally and has to be entwined with one another through the liberal arts. This is a liberal education. You want to be liberally educated, because what is liberal? It comes from libertas, which is freeing, right? It literally just means freedom, freeing, liberty, right? And so this is the education of liberty, of those who want to liberate themselves from what? What are we liberating ourselves from? From naivety, from destruction, because if we don't know where we're going, we don't know that this way is detrimental to our being, and this one is promising and flourishing. And so we have to understand that dichotomy, to flourish or destruct, exists, and we want to educate ourselves and free ourselves from all of these inequities that exist as man. And so this is the epitome of the conversation that has occurred and that has led to the flourishing today, because people have educated themselves and they've said, I want to choose the path of justice, I want to choose the path of righteousness, and I want my fellow man to benefit and to grow, because that's the most important thing for us to do. That's what we can offer today, is that we can build a future of flourishing. Although now might stink, in which it has. The past has been awful. There's been so many awful things. But look where we have come from, right? You might criticize all of these different ideas that have occurred over the century, and that's your right, because we should look from a point of criticism and say, I don't actually quite agree with that, and here's why. And put it to the wider world. Put it out there and start the conversation and get it flowing, because that's what we need to do. We need to get this conversation just going and started again, because I think that, being someone who is Gen Z, we have not had this conversation. At least I've not been made aware that I am part of a 3,500-year-old dialogue, and I'm sure you have not either. And so it's important that we start this conversation explicitly again, that we aren't just being passive about it, that we're engaging in conversation and that we're engaging in this dialogue with one another, because that's what needs to happen if we are going to continue the path forward and the path up. That's what needs to happen. And so all of this has led to the culmination of flourishing that we have today through the wealth of nations, right? And through capitalism, that evil word, right? Capitalism. And so it's happened because of that, because we've progressed the ideas forward and continued growing and building up over millennia. And that's significant. And if we don't believe that's significant, we're wrong. And you just honestly probably want to watch the world burn then. And I hope that this conversation can convince you otherwise, that we can work together to go forward, because that's what I want for you. And then that's what I want for me and my kids and your kids, and that we can all grow together and grow up in virtue and in spirit and in material well-being too, because that's what we all want, right? We want a little better world, right? Now, I have my air conditioner going in the other room, and that's wonderful. 100 years ago, didn't have that really. So I think that's a modern luxury that we have, and this decadence that we experience today is a result of the past, and these comforts that we have, the result of the past. I saw the other day a little article on criticizing capitalism, that there's 9 million people in the world that are dying every year of starvation. And I initially thought to myself, like, everyone has that. That's horrible. I cannot imagine wasting away and dying from starvation. Now I can put myself through a thought experiment, sure, but I can't really imagine doing that or watching my child suffer and die. And I thought, wow, it's awful. Then I thought, only 9 million people. When in the 20th century alone, I can't begin to count the amount of people that died from starvation. I think there was 6 million or 4 million or 6 million, I can't quite remember, kulaks that died under the USSR, right? And the countless many more that died in the Great Leap Forward in China, right? Under communism. And I thought, wow, only 9 million people. How amazing is that? I can't believe that we've created a world that only 9 million people die of starvation every year. Maybe next year we can get 8. And maybe next year we could get 5. Because growth is exponential, right? And maybe nobody dies necessarily of starvation. At least they don't have to. And so maybe that's a world that we could work towards and we could build, because that's what we should be looking to do, right? And that's what these ideas have looked to do. Whether they knew it or not while they were writing it, they were writing because they were possessed by a will and a spirit of forward in trying to look up, because no one does something unless they're psychopathic, which is about 2 to 3% of the population, that they don't do anything knowing that it's wrong, right? We don't do things that we think are wrong because it's counterintuitive. And so whether these people knew it or not, whether Marx knew it or not, which I think he did, they were working towards something because they saw a problem and they wanted to fix it. And that's what we should be looking to do too. And so that's kind of why you read it, because we want to turn forward and we want to turn upwards. And you can only do that when you're educated across the span of time that's happened, right? Across this chasm of existence that we've all been a product of, really. We're both in the West, a current participant and a product of the tradition of the West. And if we don't participate, it's not that we lose the conversation, but we lose our lives and the conversation continues. And we just begin to play out the ideas that have happened in the past. And so why contribute? Because you want to be conscious of your contribution. And so now, do you have to read all of it? No, you don't. I don't think you do. That's my opinion. Some people might have a different opinion. That's my opinion, and I think that we could try. That could be our steps. And they have in the Great Conversation, they have a 10-year reading plan, and they put together all the different ways that you could kind of read it in order and throughout the canon of the West, which I think is a really great idea, and it's really beautiful. And I'm going to put it up. What I'm going to do is I'm currently making an ebook, and truthfully, I'm making it with, and that's disclosed too in the ebook, but it's affiliate links that I have that helps this channel, that helps me grow and to create more content and spend more time creating content and diving into these books with you and creating this conversation. I'm going to make an ebook that has all of the books listed out, and I'm going to put the reading list in, and I'm going to make sure to cite it and everything properly to give credit where credit's due. And I'm going to put that in an ebook, and it's going to be just really everywhere. I'm going to put it on my Instagram and my Facebook and Twitter and all that. And so I'll probably even make a video just saying that I've released the ebook, and so that you can go grab yourself a copy and you have the whole list. You don't have to go to Wikipedia every time. You just have the ebook. And then I'm also going to include some of my personal recommendations, although because there's going to be like 104 tomes, I'm not going to worry myself about creating a super long list because some of my favorite picks are going to be in there. And so I'm just going to create 10 or 15 books that I'm going to recommend on top of those books. If you want maybe a little lighter reads, I think they're probably going to be a little self-helpy. I don't know yet. And so that's something that's going to be there. But because I want as many people to read as many of the books as possible, I'm going to include that whole list. Although daunting as that might be for anybody, I hope the reading list helps, and I'm going to, just lay out their whole plan. And so hopefully that suffices. And so whether or not you do buy this book, that ebook will be available, which is exciting because then we can continue to have better and better conversations. And so also it makes you, before I move on, it makes you a better reader to read these books too. I thought to myself for a long time that, I can't read this book because I'm not smart enough. I haven't had the education. I haven't had the training. And this is that air of specialization that we think that only university professors can dictate to us the tomes and the describing of the great and mighty authors of the past, that only a literary genius could read Shakespeare to us because otherwise we would never understand it. And I think that's absolute crap. That's absolute baloney. We don't need to have someone dictate that to us because I don't care about their mind being freed, right? I do, of course, but I care more about my mind being free, and I want your mind to be free. And so I want you to read these books yourself, and because there's a transformative process. And honestly, it's painful sometimes. When I read The Brothers Karamazov, it was painful. It was excruciating at times to read it because it was tearing apart pieces inside of me. And that's what great books should do. It should be painful to encounter them and painful to read them. And we should read them over and read the line again and again and again because we don't understand it. And we want to understand it. That's what's painful, is we want to grasp what the writer's saying because, gosh, they're so good at what they do. And so that's why they're the great authors. And so let us read these great books so that we might be transformed by them. That's the point that we want to hit when we're talking about why to read this, because it makes you better too. Reading the great books of the Western world by osmosis and through transformation will make you a greater reader, a greater writer, and it will make you a greater person. That's the point of this all, is to point upwards, right? It's to point upwards and to say, here, this is the pinnacle. Let's go towards it. And so that's another reason why you should read these books. And so lastly, how can you contribute? How can you add to the conversation? And I've elucidated a lot of the ideas already, but I'm going to just list them out. And so a few of the things that you can do is to always have, first and foremost, the most important is to have an orientation of the betterment of mankind for the longest period of time possible. And so that might be saying to yourself, well, is watching porn going to help my relationship with my spouse? No. Well, it might help me now, right? It might feel good now to, give myself that carnal pleasure, right? It doesn't fulfill me in the long term. And that's not what we want. We want the long term, because that leads to the translation of us not objectifying the other sex or the same sex or whatever it might be. And then it leads to us treating our spouse with reverence. And then it leads to us translating that spirit to our kids and that understanding to our children of why you don't do this. And then that translates into them being generationally better human beings and to living better lives and more aligned and building greater relationships and deeper relationships, which is exactly what we want. And so when you ask yourself, why give in to this carnal need now? Because there's a greater thing coming if you just delay the gratification and build, in this case, intimacy with your spouse. And so that's a very important thing, and how you can contribute in the first and foremost way to the conversation. The other ways that you can contribute are journal. Write your thoughts while you're reading these, right? Journal it down. Maybe you'll be like Marcus Aurelius, right, who's also included in the texts. maybe you'll be like him and your journals will be discovered someday, and your ideas on, the Republic or Aristotle or Dante will be, brought forward and give revelation to future generations. That would be amazing. And so journal. Your thoughts matter, if not to anybody else, to you, because the best way for us to figure out what we're thinking and what we're trying to get at is to write them out. And that first occurs while journaling. And so journal your thoughts of the books. Keep a commonplace notebook by your side. Put a notebook. Always carry one with, whatever it takes. And I encourage you to take them by hand, because it helps encode that into our memory, because we're connected with the piece of paper rather than typing on a screen. But writing on iPad seems to do well too, if that's your thing. But journal, write things down, start somewhere, write your thoughts because they matter. And read other texts and compare to the great authors and to what you're reading now. And so Brené Brown differs exponentially from Dostoevsky, right? Or Freud. She differs exponentially, but she's seen as a very great author now. And no doubt she has amazing talents as an author, but pales in comparison and to the writing style and the ability to write, but also the depth of the ideas. It pales in comparison to Freud and to Dostoevsky and to Nietzsche and to Aristotle and all the rest. And so read in order to compare what you're putting into your body, maybe previously. Maybe you were into self-help and you're looking for the golden nugget, right? That everybody looks for, the quick fix that'll help you stop being depressed. Well, no, probably doesn't. And all of the great ideas today take note of the ideas of the past. And so you're just reading their source material in one way or another, whether it's through a theory they follow or a writer they read, or honestly, for a lot of people, it seems to be quotes. I see lots of quotes floating around of Dostoevsky and of Nietzsche and even of Aristotle, and Aurelius is popular right now with the Stoics. And so I see lots of quotes floating around, and that's great, but a quote is not the book, because it's not contextualized and it's not throughout the whole narrative, and that there's importance there. And so to take what you have now and to compare it with the great authors and to compare it back and have this dialogue with yourself and journal it, right? Because that's important, as I just said. And so do that, have that process. Another way that you can contribute is to form communities, whether digitally or in person. I would hope that you could form some sort of, in-person, physical community that comes around these great books. Maybe you have a group of friends that you say, hey, I don't know, I watched this cool guy on YouTube and he's talking about this great conversation and a lot of books, a lot of old books that seem pretty cool, that talk about what it is to be a person and what justice is and what is love and all these things. And I don't know, you guys want to tackle it together and see how far we get? Sure, sounds good. And you form a little book club. That would be amazing. That'd be a wonderful step forward and upward to elucidating these ideas and bringing light to the world, to the darkness of the naivety that exists inside all of us. And so that'd be very important. And lastly, I don't know, I threw this in here, write your own book. Write your own book on your thoughts, or try to add to the conversation. You notice an idea that was lacking and you want to build on it. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. We have this perpetual stacking of shoulder-stepping giant things. And so we want to step on the shoulders of these giants, acknowledge that they're giants, that they're not just daft country folk, right? That they are brilliant thinkers like you, because you'd want someone to give you the same credit for a great work of art, because writing and thinking is an art and they go hand in hand. No pun intended. So you want to do that. And so write your own book. That's another way you can contribute, or create your own content, start a channel. Hopefully you could surpass whatever subscribers I have at the time, and that would be amazing. And tell me about it. Come back to me when I only have, I don't know how many subscribers I have right now. I think like 36, and it's like maybe I have 37 by that time. And so you say, okay, great. That's amazing. And I just want to let you know that because of you and exposing to your idea, this is it. That's what I want. That's the only thing I want. I want this for the growth of everyone, because this is a conversation for everyone. And I think that we need to have it. And there's great importance to this conversation. And without it, we are doomed to fail. The generations to come are doomed. And there's significance here. And perhaps the most significant things lie in these texts. And right now we have generations that are going to grow up with nothing but immediate gratification and a very earthly view of what it is to be a human. And we are both matter and form, body and spirit, right? And so we have this duality. I mean, it's a substance, but we have this duality, these two different parts that we belong to in a sense. And so they don't know that because they're always digitalized and virtual. There we go. And so they don't know that. And it's important that we help them grow up in a world that they know that they are valued as a soul, that they have a soul, and that they are part of something greater, and that they're always part of something greater, that they are never the centerpiece of creation, that the centerpiece of creation was Christ, right? And that's what gets put forth in these books, and that's what's so significant about it, right? And then it gets, countered too in these books. And so it's just a wonderful wealth of ideas. It's treasure trove, truly, that a collection like this exists, because prior to that, I was thinking of what it would be like to put this book together and that book together that I thought were significant in my education, my brief philosophy minor and psychology major. It's like, these are kind of cool books. I wonder if a collection like that exists. And we just happened to stumble across it. It's amazing. And so, yeah, I hope that you are encouraged by this and take heart that you have the capacity to join the conversation that you're already a part of, but that's just a conscious effort now, that you are willing to look forward and upwards and to make the world a better place. And so with that, I'm gonna wrap up and just say thank you for joining me on this conversation. I appreciate your time and effort in staying through this very, I'm sure, dry conversation, but hopefully it was a very encouraging one. And so I encourage you to subscribe and hit the like button if you've made it this far. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books or whether you're just hearing about this for the first time. It'd be wonderful to hear. And thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you next time.